Peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
The International Court of Justice is a court that was created to solve problems of disputes of any nature. But this court was created on the basis that times could change and the constitutionalism and the mandate could also change. The International Court of Justice has never changed. In this court, there is no chamber for appeal. There is no chamber for amicus curiae, for people to bring in their opinions in terms of individuals or organizations that are hurt in one way or the other, or good opinions that could shape the outcome of the findings or the cases filed there. This court, therefore, remains one of the most obnoxious, one of the most opaque institutions whose findings we don't know who decides and how the decisions are taken, how stakeholders are supposed to recourse to a remedy, where to get a remedy, we don't know. A court has no chambers, no lower chamber, no upper chamber for appeal. It has itself as a final court of jurisdiction around the world. Are the people of the world going to say, is Somalia and Kenya going into this court, seeing the obstacles that they will cause for the region? Those are the questions I ask. And I want my viewers and those listening to this tape to understand that Africa needs to solve the problem in an African way. There is no other way to solve the problem of Somalia and Kenya amicably than sitting on a table to have a discussion, find ways of resolving the conflict that has brought us to not talking terms. But Somalia seems to be pushed by external darker forces to go and dismember the unity that we have in the Great Lakes region and the Horn of Africa. ICJ as a court is an institution that is very opaque, very dark in its sense of darkness, that you don't know how decisions are made. There is no counter checks and balances in the decision making. I therefore urge Somalia and Kenya not to attend this court. I urge Somalia and Kenya to avoid this court for the sake of peace in the Indian Ocean. I also have called upon the countries that are supporting Somalia to take this case, to withdraw their support for the sake of security, because we have only one common enemy. The enemy are the terrorists killing the innocent Somalis who need our help to be liberated from these fighters who have come and gathered in the great once country, or the Pearl, one of the Pan-African countries in Africa. Thank you very much, viewers. That is my message to the world. Let's spread it. The International Court of Justice is opaque. It doesn't have appeal chamber. It doesn't have preparation chamber. It doesn't have any. Once the decision is made, the decision is final. Do we need that? We call that democratic. I leave it to you. Thank you.
My government's Vision 2030 aims to transform our country, Kenya, into a newly industrialized middle-income country, providing a high quality of life to all her citizens by 2030. The attainment of universal health coverage by 2022 is one of 4 big agenda of my administration. Focus is on ensuring access to affordable, quality health services as a basic for ending extreme poverty, improving productivity, especially in low-income and middle-income areas. In December of 2018, I commissioned a pilot of the universal healthcare implementation, targeting a population of 3.2 million to inform its national scaling. In its 9th month now, the pilot focused on investment in strengthening primary healthcare, and it has been instructive in identifying best practices, lessons, and gaps in implementation. It continues to be a work in progress, and we are inching closer to the leave no one behind, with a special focus on the most vulnerable in our society. I wish to reiterate the support and commitment of my government to contribute to global efforts towards the achievement of universal health coverage and all sustainable development goals.
Thank you very much, viewers. Today, COMESA is sitting in Nairobi to find out how free trade can unite the countries of COMESA and Africa. The trade in Africa has been a trade of cut off, cut on, put back, switch off, switch back. The common market for East and Central Africa and Southern Africa, which is commonly known as COMESA, puts us a step forward towards integration of Africa and accelerates the integration of Africa. I believe in building block by block of integration of Africa. I believe in building inch by inch, country by country, removing all the tariffs that have hindered Africa from trading freely amongst themselves. Africa's population can buy its own goods. African population can purchase, can import materials that are not needed, that are not in Africa, but can import from each other the materials that are available. This can be done without any further push, any further pull from any of the countries. You might have differences with Europe, but you can also solve those differences by uniting with Africa in order to trade with Europe. It is therefore very important for Africa and Africans to encourage such meetings, like the meeting that is attended by President Museveni, President Uhuru Kenyatta, President Lungu, President of Madagascar, and other COMESA leaders who are in town to discuss the trade, free trade amongst COMESA countries. The East African Common Market of the East African Community is one of the blocks that will build COMESA into an African free trade zone. I encourage, I support, we stand by all the deliberations that are being conducted in Nairobi. Thank you, viewers.
and thank you for joining us today. It is the 26th day of September 2019. The show, of course, is Good Morning Africa, where we get to bring you the latest from the continent, and of course we always start from Kenya, and then we look at what else is making headlines across Africa, and as well as we'll be talking about a lot of things today we have in store for you, and the Uhuru Kenyatta United Nations speech. President Uhuru Kenyatta, that is the president of Kenya, made a speech at the United Nations, and he touched on a number of things, and we'll just be looking at the key highlights on that speech. And of course, he talked about bold actions that give meanings to the theme of this year's General Assembly. And this year's General Assembly's theme was galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. And he touched in these topics in how Kenya was trying to achieve some of this. And also he talked about the peace and the complexity of factors that affect the stability and the peace in some African countries. And also he mentioned, the progress. He congratulated the progress that has been made in Sudan and also in South Sudan, the peace efforts, as well as he also mentioned the tensions right now between Kenya and Somalia. That was also part of his speech, and of course we'll talk about that. President Uhuru Kenyatta, as we all well know by now, had a meeting with Mr. Farmajo, the president of Somalia, that I think was mediated by the AU chairperson, Mr. Al-Sisi, so Abdel Fattah Al-Sisi there. So we will talk about that shortly. We are trying to get in touch with the doctor. If we can, we'll let you know, and we'll have this conversation with him. If not, then I will just carry on. And also we'll have a lot in store for you in terms of what is making headlines across Africa today. We'll look at Congo. Can you believe people are still dying from missiles? And Congo has lost about 3,500 people from the start of this year. Which I was just having this conversation with the crew members earlier, and we were wondering what is wrong with Congo. Be it Ebola, it has been claiming lives there like nobody's business. And now there isn't a missiles outbreak. Are there no vaccination in Congo? What is happening in Congo, really? And also we look at Egypt, and some people have been already, arrested outside of the ones, the protesters that were arrested that participated in last week's, protest on Friday and Saturday against what they say is the poor leadership of Mr. Al-Sisi, and also high rate of corruption in Egypt there. But some members also, who are senior members, they have been, arrested, and one of them is the former chairman of Egypt's opposition, Dostur party. So we will look at that. And also there has been some protests in Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. And, it is completely surrounded by South Africa. So we'll get to know what's really happening in that country. And also we look at Rwanda, which has received the first batch of refugees, from Libya. It was said that they will be repatriated in other African countries, especially the refugees who are running away from their countries due to persecution, wars, and things like that. So Rwanda agreed to take a number of them, and the first batch arrived in Rwanda, yesterday. So we will talk about that. As well as Sudan got a hold of some refugees who are trying to escape to Libya in some African countries. So it is a lot happening. And of course, a lot of Ghanaians and indeed Africans continue to mock what the Ghanaian government said was attempted coup, and the people that they arrested. But these people have been arraigned in court. They were arraigned in court yesterday. And we will look at Cameroon, especially the matters with Anglophone. And of course, the talks are scheduled to start on 30th. Remember, President Paul Biya of Cameroon had said that he wants a national dialogue, but he was not very clear on what he wanted these dialogues to include. But he said he was extending himself and wants a dialogue with the Anglophone region of Cameroon. So we're going to look at so far. Are there even grounds that can ensure that there will be a successful dialogue? Because he has insisted that his presidency is not going to be challenged, because I think some section of journalists were suggesting, perhaps the presidency should be rotational with a presidential term limit, and of course the office through the Prime Minister, Mr. Ngute, came out and said, no, that is not something that will be part of the dialogues. I don't know what Mr. Paul Biya's, what he envisions this dialogue to be like, but a lot of stakeholders there has already presented, what they think should be included in these dialogues there in Cameroon. And also we look at Libya. And of course, a report by the United Nations that is really a warning on an escalating war there in Libya. It might go to a full-blown, fully fledged war like it was when President Omar al-Bashir was ousted from power there in 2011, and that country has not known peace since then. So we will look at that, but that is just what is in store for you. And of course, a speech by President Buhari from the UN General Assembly there, he mentioned something about social media and is not very happy with it. So we will have a conversation with that. But keep writing to me wherever you're watching us, and let me know where you're watching us. And let me just take us through quickly what is making headlines in Kenya this morning on the daily newspapers. Of course, we normally have the Daily Nation, the Standard newspaper, and the Star. Those are the leading newspapers here in Kenya. And then shortly, and then we can come back to our African news and look at other topics that we have in store for you. But thank you so much for joining, and a very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you're watching us today across the globe. So we look at the Daily Nation, where Uhuru reaches out to Somalia over border, and President Farmajo insists a dispute must be solved by the International Court, and that will form our basis of, our topic of the day later on. We will look at that, and President Uhuru Kenyatta tried to reach out to Somalia President while they're attending the United Nations General Assembly there in New York, and Farmajo has insisted that is the President of Somalia that ICJ is the only way for Somalia. So we will look at that in depth. And yet another multi-million shilling oil racket, and crooks are siphoning thousands of liters of fuel from the Kenya Pipeline Company's system daily, thanks to the brazen comprising of a pump station at Konza, and Kenyans are paying for the losses, running into millions of shillings. That is also in the Daily Nation's headlines on the front page. And of course, leaders demand arrest. Mr. Moses Wainaina, the owner of the structure that killed 8 children on Monday, is a man under siege. And this is the proprietor of the school that collapsed on Monday. The school was not even proper for any child to be attending there as a school, even any human being to live in. It was in really bad conditions, and it did not meet even the minimal, standards for anything habitable by a human being. But students, 800 of them, pupils, have been going and attending the schools. I don't know how long the school has been in running, and why the authorities, especially from the city council of Nairobi, have not seen this, because when a school where 800 kids are attending, this is not a small school. This is a huge, this is a big number. And why the ministry, why the Nairobi county government in particular was not alarmed or had not paid a visit to that school and see. That means they don't really work. And all these ministries we have in all these counties, they all have their ministries of education, of health, and things like that. If you look at the sanitation conditions in that school, the washrooms those children are using in that school, it is health hazardous. And it's really disappointing to know that we have people who are mandated to be looking at certain things in the city and across the country, and they fail to do to just take up their responsibilities and ensure. If you've been given the docket of health in the county, say of Nairobi, then you're supposed to make sure. If you're in education, then you're supposed to make sure that all the institutions, be it private or public, meet at least the bare minimum standard in terms of the facilities, the structures themselves, the infrastructure of the school, the teaching personnel. Are they even qualified? The washrooms, are they even safe? Are they even, enough for the children there? So that goes to show the negligence, and not just on the part of the school, which I think this owner should be held should take full responsibility. But also, I hear the Nairobi County Governor, Mr. Mike Sonko, has already fired some people from his cabinet. But I don't know if what fruit that will bear. A little too late. But that is something that the city council has failed. The city council leadership of Nairobi has failed, these students, has failed these families, has failed those who lost their lives on Monday in that unfortunate incident, because they're supposed to be the ones who take full responsibility and who make sure that all the schools that are run in this county and indeed across the country, they meet at least the bare minimum standard of safety, of cleanliness, just the bare minimum. And as it is now, that was not the case. So that is in the Daily Standard. And we look at the Star and crisis at City Hall as Sonko reigns of chaos goes on. And MCAs warn of paralysis, fouled county chiefs management, and that is in page 4 and 5. Apparently, Mr. Mike Sonko, the Nairobi governor here, that is according to the Star newspaper. There's a lot of chaos there in county of Nairobi and the leadership of the county of Nairobi, and he finds himself in he's called in the chief's management style. Apparently, Sonko, in how he's managing this city, is not his people are not very happy with it, and the county assembly members there are not very happy with his leadership style in Nairobi County. Let me just see what that says here in page 4 and 5 of the Star newspaper. I'll just read a line or two. And it says, Governor Mike Sonko threw Nairobi County into a crisis yesterday after he suspended 16 county officials, including his super CEC, Charles Kerich. The mass suspensions followed the recent tragedy at Precious Talent Academy, where a collapsed building killed 8 pupils. With the latest changes, nearly half of Sonko's cabinet will be serving in an acting capacity, meaning they cannot make some decisions. So apparently, hopefully he'll fill those vacancies very, very soon, because if you're in an acting position as a minister, then there are certain decisions that you cannot make unless you were a fully fledged, minister in that docket. In this case, in the Nairobi County, ministerial docket. And Mr. Sonko there has fired a number of the city work staff there over, the collapsing of the school, the Precious Talent School there in Dagoretti, that is in Nairobi County. So, and ex-youth boss Semalangos jailed over 3.6 million Kenya shillings debt, and as well, Egyptian leader brokers Kenya Somali maritime boundary talks. That is on page 6, and I don't want to get into that in detail because we will talk about it later. It is in one of our topics today, and we will see that handshake that we saw yesterday between President Uhuru Kenyatta and his Somali counterpart, Mr. Mohamed Farmajo. Does that mean that there could be a different tide when it comes to the relationship between Kenya and Somalia, which has been has been frosty for a few months, actually a few years ago, from 2014, when Somalia, first went to the International Court of Justice, he took Kenya there over the maritime boundary dispute. So we will look at that. And Dr. Matranga at some point will be joining me via Skype. But if he's unable to, then, we'll see what to do. But he's in Brussels, and we are meant to be talking to him. So the technical team is working, and we'll just get to see what's happening and his thoughts on what is happening today in Africa and some news in Kenya and indeed across the world. And on the Standard newspaper, Raila says that we are ready for a powerful premier. And now this is a bombshell that will not be accepted by a section of politicians in this country, because this is what they've been running around saying, that Raila Odinga and his proposal for a referendum and for the change of the constitution is to allow for a powerful prime minister. And of course, somebody like the deputy president has come out very clearly and said, that will not be acceptable. And so when he makes such remarks, of course, this will, he's just thrown a spanner into the works, and this will bring a lot of political, talk that will be endless in the next coming few days. And he continues to say that opposition leaders say the parliamentary system is the best way to stop election-related violence and ethnic division. So we're just waiting, because the report from the Building of Bridges initiative that was launched last year after the famous handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga, who is now a special envoy to AU infrastructure, to AU, and has sort of changed the tides of politics and the dynamics of politics in this country, and it was not foreseen. So got a lot of many people, a lot of people by shock. And so they've been working on, so the BBI was mandated to just go across the country and seek for Kenyans' opinions on some of the solutions, especially when it comes to the, electioneering time every 5 years. We've seen a lot of chaos and people fighting and things like that. So they're trying to get to the bottom of it. So the BBI was mandated in going to finding the root of the causes of political acrimonies and the hatred and things like that happen especially during the electioneering period. So the report is ready. So we're waiting next month that it will be submitted and it will be given to the president, and hopefully it will be made public, and then we can look at it. So that is just on the headlines on the Standard newspaper. I'm told that Dr. Matranga could be ready for us any moment now. So I don't know if I should just say hello to him, or we take a break as we hope he joins us. So let me just take a very quick break to allow Dr. Matranga to join us straight all the way from Brussels, and he'll be talking to us about our topics for today. Of course, we look at the Uhuru Kenyatta's United Nations speech, the handshake at the UN between Kenya and Somalia Presidents. Will it work? And then I'll come back and just look at the news that is making headlines across Africa. And if you can see in our title there, we have a lot of countries to talk about and a lot of things to cover. So please don't go too far. Good morning, Africa. We'll be right back.
My government's Vision 2030 aims to transform our country, Kenya, into a newly industrialized middle-income country, providing a high quality of life to all her citizens by 2030. The attainment of universal health coverage by 2022 is one of 4 big agenda of my administration. Focus is on ensuring access to affordable, quality health services as a basic for ending extreme poverty, improving productivity, especially in low-income and middle-income areas. In December of 2018, I commissioned a pilot of the universal healthcare implementation, targeting a population of 3.2 million to inform its national scaling. In its 9th month now, the pilot focused on investment in strengthening primary healthcare, and it has been instructive in identifying best practices, lessons, and gaps in implementation. It continues to be a work in progress, and we are inching closer to the leave no one behind, with a special focus on the most vulnerable in our society. I wish to reiterate the support and commitment of my government to contribute to global efforts towards the achievement of universal health coverage and all sustainable development goals.
Today in Africa, we see a lot of uprisings, planning for uprisings, plotting for uprisings in several African countries. The events on the African continent, therefore, as predicted much earlier myself, in 2017, I said, before 2020, 13 African countries would have undergone either soft regime change, soft coups, or violent regime change through uprising, which now seem to be real. The signs that and the symbols that we see are the real symbols and the signs that more is to come against African governments. What do we do then? There is a new method of changing governments strategically placed in the United States of America by George Soros. George Soros funds civil societies, civil disobedience, civil violence in Africa. It is upon you Africans and African heads of state, wherever you were, as you plan to convene next month or before the end of this month in Addis Ababa, to understand the magnitude of this regime change strategy. Many wars are taking place, internal strife, conflicts like the one in Cameroon, Ambazonia, like the one in Biafra, Boko Haram, and then in Biafra, like the one in Libya. But the theme is the same. Regime change, uprising. Is it a matter of taking over our resources? You see, the war in Congo has erupted again. Unknown militias have arrived in Congo, restarted the war, and it is going on. All these culminate to one thing. Are we ready to be independent? As I said last week, this week, are people in Africa ready to accept the results of elections? Elections everywhere in Africa are bringing the chaos we see. The people of Africa seem to be divided after elections or before elections. Is Africa ready for elections? Do we need elections in Africa? If so, are we tolerant enough to accept results? Are we ready? Which method can we use in Africa to make sure that there is hope for the countries and there is hope and the future of Africa is guaranteed? Viewers, the High Court in Malawi today or yesterday was hearing a case when the president had already been sworn in. If the president of Malawi has been sworn in, then the High Court is hearing the case. Is that not a disaster, an accident in waiting? Whether this will make us have a peaceful Africa remains to be seen. And may God help us to build a better Africa. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. This, of course, is Good Morning Africa, and we just took a very short break here. Oscar Dira, you're saying whether work or not, we have to sort things out as Africans. I think you're referring to the conversation that you're going to have this morning about Somalia and Kenya Maritime Row. And right now, joining me all the way from Brussels is none other than Dr. David Matranga. And Doctor, good morning.
Good morning, Nairobi. Good morning, Kenya.
So you're in Brussels. What are you doing in Brussels, leaving me here in Nairobi?
I am, you are aware, I just came to make sure that I work and put pressure on the governments, both governments of Kenya and Somalia, to return to table. First of all, I am here again in Brussels on my way to other capitals of Europe to mobilize Africans to stand up, to come up and protest on 3rd, 4th, 5th, and up to 6th, when the purported court will be taking place. I have secured permission for the same, and I came my documents. I'll come back with them for a demonstration, a picketing, to present a petition to the International Court of Justice that this dispute between Somalia and Kenya should be resolved through table negotiations. We have the AU mechanisms of resolving the conflict. Why Somalia rushed to the International Criminal Court is because of some international bandits who walk around Europe, walk around Africa looking for conflicts, because of merchants of conflicts who created that problem that Somalia was pushed to go to the International Court of Justice. We have existed as brothers and sisters for centuries. I don't see why we should talk about a border when African Union is looking for a one united Africa with no trade barriers. Why should we be talking about the border? That's why I'm in Brussels. I will be leaving shortly, and my flight will be taking me to the next destination. And as you are aware, yesterday I filed a complaint, and I have filed a complaint to the Serious Fraud Department of the Great Her Majesty's government, seeking a review of the investigations that were closed as the result of no evidence. But it seems we've got new evidence that we want to put forward, and we want to be called so that we can put this evidence before the Serious Fraud Office of how the Prime Minister of Somalia, who is currently Mr. Hassan Khariye, was able to sell blocks of oil, and yet Somalia was under instructions of the United Nations Security Council. Nothing should be sold to it, nothing should be gained out of it. And that's my argument. I'm taking it higher. I am very glad that President Uhuru Kenyatta and President Famijo of Somalia have made, but that does not, I'm not a diplomat. I am an activist. It doesn't stop me from doing my work. I will always make my stand until they come and sign, and I see a signed agreement is when I will cease the fire.
So what you're saying is, by Somalia going ahead and selling these blocks while this matter had already been brought to attention to the United Nations, Somalia violated some charters in the United Nations. So what are the implications of these violations?
The implications are very, very dire. The implications are that once the ruling is made, I'm trying to protect the Ugandan troops and the Kenyan troops who are in Somalia. If this conflict escalates and a ruling is made by a biased panel of judges, where a Somali judge is the head of the panel, you don't expect Kenya to get a fair ruling. First, I've made those complaints to the court, the registrar, for the judges to exclude the Somali judge. The writing is very clear, and I'm told the Somali government has equally got concerns that they want their national to be out of the panel. So here we are. This is what we call international victory, international lobby, international campaign, international advocacy. Kenyans must stand up. Kenyans must stand up and defend their country. They must stand up and realize that losing a territory of their country out of machinations brought by external darker forces of George Soros and the merchants of trade, the Howard of United Kingdom. These are merchants. They are merchants of conflict. They buy blocks which they haven't seen. Where is it? Where is the oil in the ocean? God created this ocean. He didn't tell you go and disturb the oil down there. So you imagine that you pay money for an imaginary block. What the hell is this going on? So I am stopping that. I am single-handedly one man. I'm together with very many friends, intellectuals, lawyers in Europe. We formed this, and I want Kenyans to follow me in the deterrent formula group. We must rally, come out, give food to those Kenyans who appear there, or East Africans or Africans. I want to call upon the Biafrans to join me, Cameroonians to join me, to expose these international agencies that have brought us chaos. They don't look at the conflict that is in Cameroon. They have not looked at the conflict that is in Biafra. They have not looked at the conflict at Central African Republic. They are creating another conflict in the Indian Ocean. The only route to the east for the trade for the country of Britain, which we must protect.
All right, and there's a comment here by one of our viewers that I think is very interesting. Oscar Dira is saying, when will our leaders on Africa in general should learn how to deal with our internal problems without involving the white people? This black regime matters, not white regime. They don't include you guys on the internal affairs. So he's thinking this is an internal African matters, and so he's wondering, why did Somalia find it necessary to take the case to the International Court of Justice? How would you reply to Oscar Adira?
That is very true. That's very true. Why do we always run? Why do we run to these guys when the court has no chamber for appeal? One of my contention is this court is opaque. It has no other place where you can take your complaint. This opaqueness has created how they sit back in the dark rooms of the Hague and formulate a policy to destroy us, to destroy Africa, to share the oil proceeds. That's what I'm looking for. I want to expose it. How do they reach a decision? How do they reach a decision when there is no amicus curiae? At least the ICC allows amicus curiae, different people with opinion, to come in to give them guidance. But 13 judges sitting to make a decision of a destiny of a country that is under law, under lawlessness, called Somalia, is rubbish. And I'm not going to take it. I will not take it over my dead body. I will stand firm and oppose it. And I'm opposing it. I don't care whether Famijuan President Uhuru Kenyatta can shake hands up to heaven. But as long as they put it in black and white, is when I will stop. I have instructions by international lobby groups to stop it, to find out who took the money, how much money was taken, who was paid how much, how did they have a conference in Europe, who are they to hold a conference in Europe, from which proceeds, from which proceeds. Maybe this proceeds ended up killing us in East Africa. Yes, I want it to widen it. I want to widen the investigations. Because at that time, the investigations were only limited to the United Kingdom. I wanted the investigating agency to expand it to Kenya, to Uganda, to Somalia, to other banks, to United States, to Norway. I want those investigations expanded. And I have a right to do so, and I'm going to do so. After all, I'm not fighting.
All right. So, of course, the meeting yesterday was brokered by Egyptian's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on the sidelines of the United General Assembly, and is seen as the first step for Kenya and Somalia to normalize the relationship that has been frosty for now a couple of years now. Do you think this meeting and the handshake really, can we be hopeful as citizens of Kenya and Somalia, that this is the first step towards perhaps a better future? Does this handshake mean anything in the bigger scheme of things?
What is that? Who is doing the handshake? This Sisi, this dictator from Egypt.
But
useless.
As his capacity as the African Union chairperson,
useless. That is useless. I tell you the frankly, and I said Sisi is one of those people assisting to dismember Africa. What is Sisi doing in Egypt? What has he done in Libya? General Sisi has given General Khalifa Haftar arms to dismember Libya. Why doesn't he solve the problem of Libya first?
But
General Sisi.
Yes.
No, wait. AU is captured by this so-called Western Hemisphere, especially France.
Yes.
I am in Europe, where I'm talking at the center of Europe. France has captured AU. So whatever Sisi is doing things that have already been captured. He's a captured man. He has now allowed Egypt to arm General Khalifa Haftar to go and kill people in Tripoli. So what is he doing there? It's a symbolic, that handshake. And when we shall talk about it at the punch this evening, so that we don't exhaust our material, I will really deliver blow by blow for you. Then you can know there is nothing that Famijo himself, what is he going to tell Somali? What is he going to, when he returns, what will he tell Somalis? That I took a handshake and I've withdrawn from let him just say I'm withdrawing, stop it quickly, and then Kenya goes to the AU immediately. Kenya and Somalia, I want until I see them in the AU table. And the viewers should listen to me and listen to me candidly. I'm speaking Ugandan English here candidly. Until I see Famijo and Uhuru Kenyatta on the table, negotiating, sitting down, and accepting that we forget, we go back to 1965 agreement where Kenya said it will not discuss boundaries, where AU said territorial boundaries should not be discussed. Then what we call a constitutive arrangement. Get me very clear, because some people are saying they are afraid what they are what. But they don't know constitutive arrangement. The constitutive arrangement of AU says go back and negotiate on table. Until I see that, I'm not going to leave the pressure. I call upon Africans, I call upon all of you in the African continent to come in huge numbers on 3rd, 4th, 5th, outside the International Court of Justice in support of arbitration negotiation instead of an amorphous, obnoxious, opaque court taking decision that will affect AMISOM. Remember, AMISOM, the biggest contingent of AMISOM are my brothers and sisters. It is Uganda that has the biggest contingent. I have a right to defend those younger men. Some have not even produced children like me. Some want to produce children in the future. They are being butchered, they are being killed. Therefore, I don't need keep quiet. As a journalist, investigative journalist, that's what I'm doing. I must make sure that I expose this matter out and put it out to the international community, and that's what I'm doing.
All right, and I think you've been very consistent by calling for negotiations between Kenya and Somalia. By negotiations, what could be some of the content or some of the suggestions you will give to these two countries in regards to this dispute?
First of all, we have the Abyei Peninsula. Oil in Abyei is being shared by both countries without 50-50. If Somalia thinks that it wants so much this Indian Ocean that God created, without Somalia knowing it was going to be created, then the two countries can sit down on table. The two countries must go back to the original agreement that was signed by the previous government. Kenya must respect its own agreement of 1965, which areas can be negotiated. Those are the things we have to iron out. There is nothing, no obligation for the Kenyan government to appear in The Hague, because this court is not criminal. I don't see why they are running around. They say they want to appear. To appear what? And do what there? What do we want to do there? Those who rushed Kenya into this court must have been derailed mentally. And I believe Professor Chief Mungai is listening to me. He might be mentally derailed. You should not have taken this court, this direction where you take Kenya, where there is an existing arrangement of 1965 that you don't discuss. Let's go to Article 36. What does Article 36 say? Let me teach these so-called lawyers in Nairobi. The Article 36 says you can come back and make a declaration that you are not coming. You are not going to discuss that matter. And it closes the chapter. Why do you want to hire lawyers for? What do you want to hire lawyers for? Tell me one reason why you want to hire lawyers. To go and do what? This question of looking for money. No, this question of looking for money, cheating, this question of corruption. Why do you hire lawyers for? We can oppose these things without hiring too many lawyers. Why are we not hiring one lawyer to put an application? I have put applications in that place. Do I need 1 million lawyers? Jermaine, people want this money to build hospitals, not people who want to destroy the country. Every opportunity they have, they use it to eat and build houses. Nowhere. And I believe President Uhuru Kenyatta is right now watching me wherever he is in New York. That's my stand. I'm a single-handed man. I am a lone ranger man with so many people behind me, millions and millions of the world. They watch me, they know what I'm saying. This court must change. This court must be reformed. The court must be reformed such that it takes complaints from all sides. We cannot continue as if there is a Second World War which ended in 70 years ago. Why are we continuing when the war ended in so many years ago? Why do we continue with the same method? Tell me one thing. Tell me, why are we coming here? Why are we coming? Why do we go to the Hague to do what? Can't this matter be resolved between Kenya and Somalia? It can. This matter can be resolved through the African court, through sitting in the AU Charter, constitutive law, that we don't go on talking about the boundaries. Someone is pushing this nation into corruption, into chaos, into conflict. They want another conflict. They have created a conflict in Ambazonia. They have created a conflict in South Sudan. They have created a conflict in Central African Republic. They have created a conflict in Congo. Now they want to create a conflict in the Indian Ocean. Tell me, anybody sensible watching there in the world, who are these people creating conflict to keep Africa depleting its little money that it has earned from taxpayer to send it on war? Who?
A very good question there, and of course, the case is set to enter full hearing between November 4th and 8th. And you've said that you have filed for a complaint. Of course, that is a matter of public knowledge. But now you're saying that you are organizing a sort of a protest march that day when the case will be starting at The Hague. Is this effective? Will this be effective in terms of bringing attention to this case?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Protests in Europe, protests in civilized democracies, protests in Africa cannot bring you change. Protests in Europe bring you change. People take the opinion. Imagine how many hundreds of journalists will be there. Imagine me addressing almost 100 journalists from different agencies narrating the story why this court should be reformed. That's a big blow. That's a big blow, more than the hiring lawyers who are just walking in with suits. Protest in this part of the world plays a pivotal role in changing democratic dispensation, in highlighting the issues, petitioning without violence.
All right. So yesterday, after the meeting between President Uhuru Kenyatta and President of Somalia, Mr. Farmajo, that was mediated by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi there in the United Nations General Assembly on the sidelines there. The spokesperson of the office of Mr. Farmajo came out and said that Somalia and Kenya have agreed to work towards normalizing relations without any implications for the maritime case at the ICJ. When he says this, do you think it will come to a place where Kenya and Somalia relationship will actually come back to what it used to be, like normalized?
It should come back quickly, diplomatically. It should come back. That is good. I welcome the decision, the meeting between President Uhuru Kenyatta and President Farmajo. Thank you. That's okay, but it doesn't change my position. My position is that I want to see Somalia remove the case from the ICJ. Full stop. I want to see the parties removing the case from ICJ. And that's my position. Kenyatta can have his position. I'm not bothered. My position is as Pan-African Forum, my institution, deterrent forum group. We want the case removed from ICJ. And Somalia can write and remove that case. And that is it. That's all I want. If they do that for me tomorrow, God bless me. And God bless Kenyans whom I am standing for.
So apparently,
yes,
yes, at the meeting that, of course, LCC mediated between Kenya and Somalia yesterday, he arranged the meeting after Kenya requested for an out-of-court negotiations. Will Somalia really agree to this? Because they've been very adamant in what they want, and they've said ICJ is the only way for Somalia.
This is not the first time. That Farmajo is a liar. You know he's going to reach Mogadishu and issue another statement. I am telling you, I want a written document. I am not happy. I am not going to be very happy and drop what I'm doing. No, I'm not going to drop what I'm doing until I see a written document that says now we have agreed to go to Harare or Dar es Salaam or Addis Ababa to sit down and talk. I will even be there with my teeth white, opening my teeth, laughing, because they would have come on the table. But for now, madam, between me and you, sorry, I don't have any. This could be a public relations stance by Somalia. And then when they reach African soil, they say, no, we don't know about it. Remember, there are several factions. The Prime Minister of Somalia is the man implicated in the sale of these oil blocks. Farmajo is not. So Farmajo could return back to Mogadishu and say, I was, coerced by African Union. I had to shake Uhuru hand. Then what will happen? I drop my things, then I come back again. My things are going on as they are. The demonstration will take place in front of the court on 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th November. Up to, I have been given days, permission has been granted. I'm sorry, I have obtained the permit to do so, and I'm going to do so. I call upon all Africans in Brussels, in Belgium. That's why I'm here. I'm calling all those in London. That's why I'm in London. I'm going in London. I'm going in The Hague. I'm going in France to call them to come to this place.
All right. So part of President Uhuru Kenyatta's speech yesterday at the United Nations General Assembly, he mentioned, of course, a number of countries and the progress Kenya is making in terms of even trying to negotiate for peace in the different countries. And he congratulated Sudan, of course, and South Sudan in the strides they're making. But also he mentioned this maritime issue in his speech yesterday at the United Nations. And I'll just read just a line from it. And he said, in the same spirit, my administration continues to reach out to the Federal Republic of Somalia in an effort to find an amicable amicable and sustainable solution to the maritime boundary dispute between us. In this regard, I welcome the decision of the African Union Peace and Security Council of 3rd September 2019 that urges both parties to engage, but Somalia has refused to engage. So where does this leave Kenya and President Uhuru Kenyatta?
That's a very good position by President Uhuru Kenyatta. And by President Uhuru Kenyatta. And he welcomes Somalia to come on table and discuss. But I am not very sure whether Mr. Famijo has the powers, because the powers seem to be with the Prime Minister who sold the oil blocks. That's why I've also taken a strategic move by going back to the old Bailey in London to go and sue this Prime Minister, where he sold the blocks. So my action is together with the President's action. As he works that way diplomatically, I am working this way actively. And I'm activist. I am the Okia wa Mutata of international community. Because Okia wa Mutata did not start the international law, I did. So I'm the Okia wa Mutata of international law. Okia wa Mutata started the common law of Kenya of stealing a chicken and some people paying less money and the money being paid, the taxation. That's very good. But I'm now the Okia wa Mutata of international waters who knows international conspiracy theory. Because even if you call me when my eyes are closed, I'll tell you who's doing the theory. That's a talent that you younger generation, especially you in the studio and others listening, should take from me. Take my steps, defend the African continent, make it workable, make it strong, make it a continent admired by people, make it a continent that is respected. We have resources. Why do we beg these people every day?
All right, it's a very good and vital point that you've made, Dr. Matranga. What else do we need to know about this case, just as we are coming to the end of this conversation?
We come to the end of this show. First of all, I would like to talk about the legacy.
Yes.
And the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. I want to thank His Excellency for the continuation of receiving awards internationally. I want to tell him that the legacy in his health care, you saw President Kenyatta received an award for universal health care. But I want to caution him that the universal health care system should work on British type of national service. And if he uses that technical approach, he will be very, very loved. He will leave a legacy. 3, I want to make sure that those who oppose the legacy, for the sake of opposing, have something that they have forgotten. Kenyatta will conduct elections. And those elections will be conducted under the government of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta. Therefore, if you insult the president today, you are insulting your journey towards Jerusalem. So change your behavior, act like a Kenyans, fight corruption, remove corruption from your institutions. This country, Kenya, if it goes down, my country, Uganda, goes down. Already you see my president is not in the US. My president is not attending the United Nations General Assembly, is he?
And why is that? Is there a reason why President Yoweri Museveni is not?
Yeah, because you cannot attend a place where people antagonize you. I agree with Museveni 100% on this.
But the US was asking for the former police general there, who they said was part of human rights abuses in Uganda.
How many human rights are being committed by America in Colombia?
Even in yes.
In Caracas. Mm-hmm. Isn't it Caracas?
In huge magnitude, and when the ICC wanted to open a case, they refused.
How many lives are being killed in Caracas?
So you feel like this is a double standards when it comes
how many? I am asking how many? Millions of lives.
Yes.
The United States has suffocated the capital city Caracas of Hugo, president.
Venezuela, yes.
Venezuela. Mm-hmm. How many lives are being killed by the blockage and the sanctions on Venezuela? How many lives are being killed in Zimbabwe? because of United States stupidity of putting sanctions on Emerson Mnangagwa when Mugabe has died. You put sanctions on Mugabe, he died with them. You want to put sanctions on Mnangagwa to die with them. Rubbish.
All right, and our friend Abdi Samad Ali here just joined, and he's reminding us that President Farmajo was awarded Concordia. Actually, yesterday I was just reading this news. President of Somalia and President of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, and also President of Ethiopia, they received an award, a sort of a peace award for trying to bring peace and their efforts on bringing peace in this region. Yes, I don't know what will be your take on that. So Abdi Samad is reminding us.
What Farmajo is bringing with peace?
They received.
He doesn't even have 2,000 troops. What peace? Kinda. There's nothing there.
His contribution to peace in this region. So him and Eritrean president.
Let them tell Abdul Hamid that let them just say his contribution to confusion.
All right. I'm sure Abdi Samad has heard that. Okay, so what else can we talk about? Do we look at the President Uhuru Kenyatta's speech yesterday at the United Nations 74th General Assembly? And some of the things that he mentioned, and of course he brought up education, and of course he mentioned peace and the strides. He said he's happy, and of course he took the opportunity to congratulate Sudan for coming to a path of sustainable peace, which they negotiated amongst themselves with the help of African Union. So President Kenyatta was actually pointing out that Sudan was able to sort out its own mess and take care of its own problems, and finally they were able to agree among themselves as Sudanese without really anybody coming from outside and coercing them into anything. So is this the way that Africans should take in finding our own solutions from within?
Thank you very much. I concur and I applaud President Uhuru Kenyatta for bringing out those tenets that make Africa better. His speech was colored with several tenets, several good words, but Africa needs to stand up and take those words into action. Today we see Africans being slaughtered in South Africa. Today we see Malema. I told you the other time that Malema works for George Soros. You couldn't believe me. You heard what Malema said in Zimbabwe when he met Grace Mugabe. Because he has smelled money. Grace Mugabe stole money and hid some money in Equatorial Guinea. Malema needs money, smells it. I was telling people, and some Africans thought Malema talks for Africa. Malema is useless. Malema is a populist. Malema does not know what to do. He wants to disorganize South Africa. He wants to discriminate the whites from South Africa. No, whites are part and parcel of South Africa. You must make sure that Africa talks with a unity of purpose. And when you see white blacks being killed in South Africa on the streets, being banned, a black to black banning, these are things that Africa should not tolerate. And I'm happy President Uhuru Kenyatta has brought them up. I wish God will help him and help everybody to realize the dream of Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, Gabriel Nasser, Obote, Julius Nyerere, Amir Cabral, Haile Selassie, Jomo Kenyatta, Sekou Toure, Beni Bella. These are the founding fathers of our free. Patrice Lumumba, the man who perished, whose body we had never buried. That's why Congo is still in turmoil. We have never seen his body, he wasn't buried. That's why Congo is a rebel-infested area. They speak Mondaleni, Samore Machel, Agustino Neto. These are the people who spoke with one voice, who stood for Africa, who said enough is enough. General Lagu. These are the people who spoke for Africa, who said enough is enough. They brought up Africa. Baba Tafawa Balewa of Nigeria, assassinated in 1965. These are people who stood for Nigeria. They brought unity of purpose. Those are the founding fathers. Nkrumah said, let's seek ye political kingdom. The economic kingdom will fall in place. Today, I see that vision coming back. through Jomo Kenyatta's son, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. My brother, keep it up. Keep it up. Africa likes you. Africa applauds what you do. Thank you very much in the studio back in Nairobi. Let's see each other tonight at 8 p.m. East African Standard Time. Miriam, you look fantastic in the studio. I didn't know that this studio is so nice when you are outside Kenya. You look so fantastic. Madam, you look so fantastic. I can't believe this is that is my studio. I am very impressed with it. Yes. God bless you. God bless all of you, the production team. God bless Africa. Hallelujah.
All right, Dr. Matranga, it has been a pleasure talking to you, and he's coming all the way from Brussels there, so we're just going to take a very short break, and when we come back, I'll be back with what is making headlines across Africa. So for now, don't go too far. Good morning, Africa. We'll be right back.
Thank you very much.
My government's Vision 2030 aims to transform our country, Kenya, into a newly industrialized middle-income country, providing a high quality of life to all her citizens by 2030. The attainment of universal health coverage by 2022 is one of 4 big agenda of my administration. Focus is on ensuring access to affordable, quality health services as a basic for ending extreme poverty, improving productivity, especially in low-income and middle-income areas. In December of 2018, I commissioned a pilot of the universal healthcare implementation, targeting a population of 3.2 million to inform its national scaling. In its 9th month now, the pilot focused on investment in strengthening primary healthcare, and it has been instructive in identifying best practices, lessons, and gaps in implementation. It continues to be a work in progress, and we are inching closer to the Leave No One Behind, with a special focus on the most vulnerable in our society. I wish to reiterate the support and commitment of my government to contribute to global efforts towards the achievement of universal health coverage and all sustainable development goals.
Welcome back. We were just having a conversation there with Dr. David Matranga, who is in Brussels, and he was just filling us in the latest, on Kenya-Somalia maritime row. So we're back, and right now I just want us to go straight to what is making headlines across Africa, and I would like for us to start with the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the latest stage of an emergency vaccination campaign has been launched in the Democratic Republic of Congo to combat a measles outbreak that has killed over 3,500 people this year. The World Health Organization and the Congolese government aim to vaccinate almost 1 million children across the country in just over a week. The UN agency describes the measles epidemic in the DR Congo as the largest and fastest moving in the world, and it has killed more Congolese people this year than Ebola. And in Eswatini, thousands of civil servants in Eswatini have been protesting against low pay and rising living cost. Clashes have erupted between police and protesters who first took to the streets in the capital Mbabane on Monday, accusing Kim Moswati III of failing to pay her enough wages entirely. And the country, of course, is entirely surrounded by South Africa. Eswatini, which we currently was known as Swaziland, and is the Africa's last absolute monarchy. We go to Egypt, where Egyptian security forces have arrested the former leader of an opposition political party, as well as 2 academics who oppose the current government, Arise Group has said. Khalid Daoud, a journalist and former chairman of Egypt's opposition Dastur party, was arrested alongside political science professors Hassan Nafar and Hazem Hosni, said the Egyptian Center for Economic and Social Rights. ECESR has been publishing updates about the arrests since they started, following the outbreak of rare protests against President Abdul Fattah el-Sisi on 20th September. Mr. Dawood, who used to report for the BBC, and Mr. Hosni are at the Supreme State Security Prosecution awaiting investigation. The ECESR said on Facebook on the 25th of September, that is the information the group gave, and it added that Mr. Nafa has yet to be located. The number of those arrested in connection with the recent protest has thus reached 1,438, the center added in a separate statement. And still in Ghana, and 3 suspects accused on plotting to overthrow the government in Ghana have been charged in court. They were arrested last week and accused of plotting to target the presidency with the aim of taking over government. The Ministry of Information said several weapons were found during a raid. At the court in the capital Accra, the 3 suspects were charged with conspiracy to commit crimes as well as illegally manufacturing firearms and explosives. Given that they are accused of plotting to overthrow the government, some Ghanaians are questioning why treason was not mentioned in court, a crime that carries the death penalty. And in Sudan, Sudan's paramilitary force announced on Wednesday the arrest of 138 Africans trying to enter Libya illegally. These migrants include dozens of Sudanese, Chadians, and Ethiopians. A statement from the Rapid Support Force said the migrants were arrested on the borders of Sudan, Chad, and Libya. The statement added that the Rapid Support Force patrol team detained the 138 people of various nationalities who are trying, of course, to cross border illegally on September 19th. And Ethiopia's government says over 1,000 people have been killed in inter-ethnic clashes over the past 12 months in a population of 100 million citizens who come from dozens of ethnic groups with competing claims to land, resources, and influence. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has struggled to contain the ethnic clashes. The Attorney General's office says violence has claimed the lives of at least 1,200 people and displaced 1.2 million people from their homes. The governing EPRDF coalition had seized power in 1991 and was dominated by the minority Tigrayans, who made up about 6% of the population. The government kept a lead on public tensions for decades by quashing virtually all dissent, including expressions of ethnic nationalism. And a group of 75 African refugees and asylum seekers is expected to be airlifted from Libya to Rwanda on Thursday. That is today, a UN official has said, the first of what could be thousands of relocated under a new program. Earlier this month, Rwanda signed a deal with the African Union and the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, agreeing to take in African refugees and asylum seekers stranded in Libya. The Rwandan government has said it is prepared to accommodate as many as 30,000 evacuees, although the plan is for the program to unfold in batches of 500 people to prevent the country of 12 million from being overwhelmed. And we go to Cameroon, where Cameroon journalists have proposed that the country adopts a federal system of government with a national rotational presidency limited to 5-year terms, ahead of the national dialogue set for September 30th to resolve the crisis in the restive Anglophone West. The Cameroon English Language Newspaper Publishers Association and the Cameroon Association of English-Speaking Journalists also called for the decriminalization of media offences and release of detained journalists. They made the proposals on Tuesday to Prime Minister Joseph Dion Ngute, who, however, said the system of government would not be discussed during the peace talks. And still in Cameroon and in English-speaking Cameroon, there is little optimism that the forthcoming national dialogue will resolve the decades of long Anglophone crisis. On September 30th, the government will start hosting a national dialogue on the future of the Anglophone territories, where separatist violence and the government crackdown have cost thousands of lives and forced hundreds of thousands to flee. The following day, October 1st, marks the second anniversary of this spiral towards conflict. The declaration of self-described Republican of Ambazonia, Republic of Ambazonia, for Cameroon's English-speaking minority. And we go to South Sudan, where since South Sudan joined the economic bloc, the East African Economic Bloc, in October 2016, the government has not been paying the yearly membership fee, which stands at $8.4 million. The new nation currently owes the region parliament over $30 million as its contribution fee. Earlier this year, the lawmakers of the East Africa Legislative Assembly threatened to kick out South Sudan over failure to pay the annual contributions. The Undersecretary for EAC at the Ministry of Trade, Industry and East Africa Affairs, Mo Athin, told IRID yesterday that the government would pay. However, some members of the public have expressed anger over the matter. They say the government should first pay the civil servants and improve the economy before paying the regional bloc. And in Nigeria, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has said social media is fueling hate crimes and called for heads of social networks to take sustainable actions. While addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Tuesday, Buhari said the world's emerging digital culture was at risk of being corrupted. And we end with Libya, where the United Nations warns escalating violence and a deepening humanitarian crisis in Libya, and is pushing the country closer to a return to a full-scale civil war, and that overthrew former dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The United Nations warns progress towards achieving a more stable, effective, and humane government has been shattered. It says that the military offensive of rebel leader General Khalifa Haftar on the Libyan capital Tripoli in April has brought the political process to a standstill. So that is the latest from across Africa. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now let's look at just some of the news quickly. We have just over half an hour, so we have enough time to actually go through some of these stories very, very quickly. And we see Nigeria there, President Muhammadu Buhari, of course, now is blaming the social media, fueling hate crimes, and called for heads of social networks to take sustainable action. And when I was reading this information, I think he also cited some examples on how social media has, specific examples on how social media has contributed towards, bringing mayhem to different communities and in Africa. So I don't know what will be your thought on this. Is President Buhari right on this, that social media is fueling hate crimes, and now he's calling for social networks head to take sustainable action? I don't know what these actions would be in particular, but I know here in Kenya there are regulations, and you can be taken to court over something that you've posted in any social media network. Maybe you are defaming somebody, or you are putting out something out there that is against the law. There is a law right now, and you can be charged with that. So I don't know in this instance what President Muhammadu Buhari is suggesting by saying that sustainable actions should be taken by social media heads, that perhaps the head of Facebook, the head of Twitter, or these other social media networks. I don't know what will be his solution for this. But Nigerian president, he was speaking at the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday, they are saying that actually social media was contributing and fueling hate crimes across the different countries, and especially in Nigeria. I think this comes to the backdrop, remember, of that activist. I don't know if he's been released. I've not seen that news yet, but the High Court, his name is Moyore or Mosoy? Please remind me. I don't want to say his name wrongly, but the High Court had he had started a hashtag, that really the government of President Buhari was not very happy about, and of course it gained momentum on social media, and it brought a lot of attention to the ills, that are facing President Buhari's government is being accused of, and I think he did not like that. So I'm thinking this conversation perhaps was addressed by that. And we know that this activist has been in jail without trial for the last 7 weeks or so, and the High Court in Abuja on Monday said that he should be released with no preconditions, but until yesterday, the guy was still being held in this prison there. So I don't know if he's been removed or not, but I've tried looking for that information. I haven't seen it, so I don't know if he's out of prison yet or not. Please let me know. And Dundi Ume, you're saying Dr. Matranga, please, you cannot talk about Nigeria founding fathers without first talking about Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the founder of Ziki's movement that liberated Nigeria and spearheaded independence in African entire countries, and Ziki's movement influenced and supported Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and other African leaders that fought their independence. And South Africa is one of the examples. Nelson Mandela went to exile in Nigeria and stayed with Dr. Raphael Bazuluike from Amici in eastern Nigeria of Igbo tribe, one of Ziki's movement's strongest allies, still alive, that liberated Nigeria from white colonialist supremacists. Thank you there for a memory lane down the history of Africa. And Dr. Matranga, I'm sure he's watching where he is, but he's not with us. We were just having, a Skype conversation. He's in Brussels right now, but we'll have another conversation later on in the evening, 8 p.m. East African time. So perhaps I'll put this question to him, so I hope you can join us then. But also, Dominic Nwando, you're saying, but social media brought Buhari to power. I know, it's like a double-edged sword here. If it's working for you, then it's okay. But if people are using it against you as what Buhari is perceiving, then he's saying, no, this social media now needs to be regulated. And we've seen countries in Africa where heads of states have gone in strides trying to regulate social media, and even in ways that is not even lawful. We've seen that in Uganda, even the government trying to increase the taxing of airtime there, and people started protesting, and the protests were led by now Bobi Wine, who said he wants to run for presidency, for Ugandan presidency in the next elections, and that got him into trouble. That was last year in July, and they decided to charge him this year in May. You remember that time that Bobi Wine went to jail? I think spent 2 nights in jail. Very chaotic, very dramatic there, but it happened, and because he was protesting last year over such matters. So we see now, because social media, you cannot, it's not like the way before social media came. Of course, we had just the conventional news outlets or media outlets there, and a lot of them are controlled by the different governments, not just in Africa but across the world. So it became a tool of propaganda by the sitting governments, because before it was allowed, many countries like in Kenya, we saw the thrive of privately owned media stations in the late 1990s, early 90s. Perhaps it was one, but we had the national broadcaster, which is the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, that is owned by the government, and you would see a lot of times, all it will do until today, I think it has reformed but not completely, it just sings the praises of the president. It's like a president's public relations tool. But now with President Uhuru Kenyatta, not so much. But when we used to have President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, our second president after our first president, President Jomo Kenyatta, and then President Moi, who was his vice president, came into power like that. All we heard, all we knew was just they used to call him, like he was the almighty, and the national broadcaster was used as his propaganda tool, and it only praised the president, and, it was like a government mouthpiece. And so a lot of media houses used to be like that. But now with the emergence of the new media, and that is the social media, and now especially the different African governments are finding it very difficult, because you cannot regulate that. You cannot tell people what information to bring out there. People are going to create a hashtag, and something is going to trend, and without you knowing it, something that is of importance has been brought to the attention of the world, and you have no control over it. So I think it's just the matter of fact that they're not able to control this social media, and that I think is giving them a lot of headache. I think not just Buhari, but a lot of African leaders, because we've seen like in Uganda, President Museveni, there's another young man, I think a medical student, who had gone to court and was asking the High Court of Kampala to compel President Yoweri Museveni to unblock him. The president had blocked him on Twitter or something. So it has come with its own challenges. But I think what is worrying a lot of our leaders is the fact that they're not able to control the narrative. They're not able to control what they want to go out in public. When a scandal breaks, you find the leaks out there, the information out there in social media. So before we come in and then we watch it now in the news, already everybody knows what's happening. And that, I think, worries them and causes them a lot of anxiety, I can imagine, when you're not able to control something, and this something can be very damaging, especially, and can expose you. You will understand why President Muhammadu Buhari comes out and saying that social media, well, in some instances, I think, granted, it can fuel a lot of hate speech, hate crimes, and we've seen that across the world. But still, it is a tool that a lot of dictators and a lot of people who don't do right will not appreciate, and a lot of people in power, because social media has become very powerful. Actually, it's gone way ahead of the conventional news media outlets, and now it is the place that people run to get any breaking news. If you heard something happening in a different country and you want to get the information, just you go to your phone, you click quickly, and you'll get the information very, very fast before you tune in to the news at 7 or 9 p.m. The news, the conventional news stations there, you'll have had the information and the breaking news. Innocent Chigbo, you're saying greetings to you all, Dr. Matranga. Are you calling me Maria? No, my name is Miriam, but thank you so much. And you're saying you're watching from Germany. Okay, guten Morgen to you. And you're saying thanks for your concern about peaceful and organized Africa Biafra discussion should be much more prominent among others. And I wish you well and bring you greetings from the IPOB in Europe. So tell me, yesterday I was reading some news here, and there has been some suggestion or some information that Biafran members in the United States were going to stage a protest during the United Nations General Assembly, the 74th meeting there in the in New York, and the Biafrans were organizing for a protest. I don't know if it happened, because they're saying President Buhari is there, and he gave a speech on Tuesday, where now he's blaming the social media for all the ills that is happening in the society, and not taking ownership to his contribution to that. And so, did that happen? Did that protest happen? And I've not seen any news about it, so let me know. And Dominic Nando, you're saying, but social media brought Buhari to power. Yes, like I said, we can only praise something if it's working for us, like we see the way they do with our constitutions. And I think we had this conversation yesterday. They'll come in, take an oath of office to defend the constitution of the land, but once they get there and they feel, okay, fine, the constitution says I should serve 2 terms, they decide, no, I'm too good, I think I still need to stay here. So these presidential term limits, let's just get rid of them. So there has been a constitutional coup after constitutional coup here in Africa, and that brings the crisis that a lot of African countries are suffering from. So if it's working for them, then it is fine. But if it's not, then they find a way to manipulate. And of course, you cannot do that with social media. You cannot. People are going to speak wherever they are. And the world has become a very small village. So somebody can tweet from wherever, and it will get straight to the president of Nigeria or Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, whatever they are, and they'll be able to see that information. So this is causing jittery among, of course, leaders, not just in Africa, but across the world. The fact that they cannot control the information in social media, that gives them sleepless nights, I'm sure, especially if their governments are riddled with corruption, human rights abuses, the lack of democracy, and just poor governance. People will always speak. If these things are in check, and these are the bedrocks to when a country can be considered to be a mature democracy, when there's space, when these dissenting voices are allowed, and democracy is thriving, and the human rights abuses are low, and the method of governing is actually okay, and the citizen of that country appreciate. So these are the bedrocks in what constitutes a mature democracy. But when you look at those points, tell me how many African countries will actually check those boxes to the T. I doubt, perhaps 2 or so, but majority no. So they worry a lot. And so we see now that in Cameroon, journalists yesterday, of course, there has been people have been proposing across the board. So yesterday, some organization and association of some English-speaking journalists from Anglophone region make their suggestions, and I think on Wednesday, and the Prime Minister received the suggestions, and they were suggesting that Cameroon they're proposing that the country should adopt a federal system of government with a rotational presidency limited to a 2 5-year term, which is what happens here in Kenya, which I think is what happens in Tanzania, which I think is what happens in a lot of other African countries. The other countries that have a 4-year terms or something like that. But in Kenya, it's a 2 5-year term. That's the max. You can only serve for 10 years as a president here in Kenya. Other countries, it's 8. I think in Nigeria, other countries, it's different. And I think in Burundi, Nkurunziza decided it's a 7-year, one time is 7 years. That's a lot, man. So, but when they were presenting some of these, of course, the Prime Minister, Mr. Joseph Dion Ngute, came out and said, the system of government will not be discussed during the peace talks. So I'm confused now at this point, because if the system of government, which I think is what is even causing jitters in the Anglophone region, the way the presidency is constituted. Mr. Biya is one of the long-serving presidents in Africa. So I think Cameroon is a ticking time bomb, even in the Francophone region. I think it will get to a point they'll be like, you know what, we've had enough of this old man. So he needs to take a seat, and we need some fresh blood here, and we need a new leadership, because as the things are right now are not working very well. Even for the Francophone region, Cameroonians up there. So the Anglophone, this organization by the English-speaking journalists came out and said, you know what, there should not be any decriminalization of media offenses and release of detained journalists, because we know especially a lot of journalists from the Anglophone-speaking region have been detained. You're detained without even trial. You're just put to jail. And, if you're dissenting, if you report something that goes against the government, that is not in line with what the government wants you to put out there, then you're taken to jail and without trial. So one of their suggestions was that, there should not be any discriminalization of the media. And if a media house has gone out there and put out something that is not okay, I think we have media bodies, like in Kenya here, we have a media body that is responsible. So if a journalist does wrong, what we'll do, somebody can write to them, and so they can take that matter, and you will be fined, or they will know how to deal with that, because that is the media regulating body we have here in Kenya, the Media Council of Kenya, actually. So these journalists are saying, you know what we need is not decriminalization of journalists in Cameroon, and also if the detained journalists should be released, and as well as they were suggesting that there should be a rotational, federal system of government with a rotational presidency limited to 2 5-year terms. And of course, the government of Cameroon, of Paul Biya, through the Prime Minister, Mr. Joseph Ngute, came out and said, that is not something that is open for talks. I don't know what Paul Biya's side is willing to talk about, because what I know from what we hear here every day is that Ambazonians are tired. That's number one. And their quest to leave Cameroon is non-negotiable. That is number 2. And number 3, they're not taking anything less than that. So when you hear the Prime Minister, Joseph Ngute, coming and saying, no, the presidency is not it will not be discussed at peace talks. So what is it? Will secession be discussed at the peace talks? Because that also, the president has said, is something that is not very welcome. And so the talks are supposed to be starting on the 30th of September. That is a few days from now. Today is the 26th, so maybe 4 days from today the talks will start. And also the government's crackdown have cost thousands of lives and forced hundreds of thousands to flee their homes. And we've seen villages in Anglophone region being burned to ashes. We've seen people dying. We've seen hospitals. In fact, that made international headlines when a hospital in the Anglophone region was burned, and it's the only hospital that serves the huge population in the Anglophone region, and was burned down by the army from Paul Biya's government. So that is alarming things that is happening there in Cameroon. So, of course, in English-speaking Cameroon, there is little optimism that the forthcoming national dialogue will resolve the decades-long Anglophone crisis. So they're saying the people from the Anglophone, and yesterday I think here one of our viewers here disputed, there's some news here I came with, and a section of some fighters from Ambazonia were saying they will be having conversations with during the dialogue with the government of Mr. Paul Biya, and they'll be issuing their suggestions through a telephone call. And you said that these are fake fighters for Ambazonia. Now, looking at this information I'm having here today, there has been some, they're not quite sure, and the people from Ambazonia are not optimistic at all about these dialogues that Mr. Paul Biya has called for, because they don't trust his intentions. They don't think he is genuine. They don't think that it will address what they're actually agitating for, and that is to have their own country. So they're saying that there's very little to look forward to in the forthcoming national dialogue. And if you are from Ambazonia, please let me know your thoughts on this. Are you optimistic about these talks that are set to start on the 30th of September, later, just a few days from today? And will they bring anything that you are looking forward to? And these talks are being held, and your leaders are still in jail, facing a life. They are serving, actually. Now they're serving. They're not facing. They're serving a life sentence there. Is it even fair, and is it justified the way things are right now? Will they be able to speak? Because your leaders that are supposed to be speaking for you have been jailed. Who are these that are going to represent you there? And do you have faith in the people that have been left there, which I don't know who, of the leaders of Ambazonia has not been arrested yet or is serving I don't know. But there anybody else out there that you have faith in outside of your leaders that have been incarcerated and are now serving a life sentence? Of course, they say they will appeal, but these talks, do you think Paul Biya is genuine? Do you think he actually means well by calling this, national dialogues and reaching out to the Anglophone? And in his reaching out, has he reached out enough? Do you think he actually have your interest at heart? Please let me know. Write to us this morning. Innocent Chibu, you're saying it's okay, thank you. And you're saying I'll try to always write your name correctly in the future. No, it's fine. It's still not Mariam, it's Miriam, but it's all good. Thank you for, having a conversation with me this morning. So we're just looking at it. President Buhari has said social media is fueling hate crime. I don't know, what is your opinion on that? Please let me know. And let's talk about it. So South Sudan joined, of course, the East Africa Community Bloc in 2016. That is in October 2016. And since then, it has been struggling to pay the annual fee, but that the member states pay, which is about $8.4 million to help run their affairs. And, just earlier this year, was it in April or May, thereabout, I was reading some news here where there has been recorded massive corruption in the East African community. The money that is meant to be paying the staff and running the affairs in the East African Community Secretariat, nobody can even trace some of it, and there has been some mismanagement of funds. And now South Sudan is facing, could be possible, being removed from the East African community, and because they've not been able to raise the $8.4 million required as a member state to be paying for that bloc to help in its day-to-day running of the affairs of the East African community. And so earlier this year, the lawmakers of the East African Legislative Assembly threatened to kick out South Sudan over failure to pay the annual contributions. And of course, the Undersecretary for the EACC at the Ministry of Trade, Industry and East African Affairs, Mr. Mo Athian, that is the Sudanese, he came out and said that the government will actually pay this money. So right now, they are in lieu of $30 million. That is how much they owe the East African community. And so when this, Mr. Mo Athian came out and said that the South Sudanese government is committed to paying this fee, and the East African community should be, a bit more understanding and more patient because they are committed to paying that fee. This is what happened. Some members of the public expressed a serious anger over this matter, so they don't understand why even South Sudan is supposed to be paying for this fee. They don't understand. They don't see the importance of South Sudan being part of the East African community, this regional bloc. So they came out and they were very angry. And fine. To some degree, you can understand their anger because the civil servants in South Sudan have not been paid now for over 6 months. For over 6 months, I think in June it was about 6 months, and now it could be 8-9 months. They've not been paid their salaries, and so they're saying no, you cannot take this money and think that commit that you're going to pay the money, the 30 million US dollars that you owe the East African community, yet you've not been able to pay the civil servants in this country for over 6 months now. So they're saying, no, you can't do that. And they say the government should first pay the civil servants and improve the economy before paying the regional bloc. Improve the economy, how? I think South Sudan right now is in a crisis and a crossroads, and I don't know if there's anybody there that is making the right decisions for that country. It's worrying, and when you look at the World Bank report over how much actually South Sudan made last year from the oil, you wonder, that was 2.4 billion US dollars, I think, from last year. That's a lot of money because South Sudan is not such a huge country, and it has been receiving a lot of help from the outside world. So you wonder what has been happening with this money. But of course, President Salva Kiir came out and said he's regretting because a lot of proceeds that the country is getting was channeled towards the war that he's been having with his deputy, Dr. Riek Machar. So he regretted that. A bit too late. So I don't know why he's not been able to get his act in order, his house in order as the president of South Sudan. So here we are. They're unable to pay the East African community. They owe East African community $30 million. At the same time, I would understand where the civil servants in South Sudan are coming from. You've not paid us for over as clearly, for nearly a year now. So what do you expect? How do you expect us to continue running the services? And it's just... Yesterday, one of members of parliament there, Mrs. Mary, I've forgotten the other name, but she came out and said the reason why South Sudan is where it is today is because there's been a lack of will by the leadership and poor leadership in terms of finding a lasting solution in South Sudan. BR, you're saying, Miriam, citizens of Cameroon are tired of the government of President Paul due to overstaying in power for... I know, it is exhausting. We had our former president, Daniel Arap Moi here, and he had been in power for 24 years. You know, ever since I grew up when I was young, that's all I knew. For 24 years. And Kenyans got tired one day. And then something called NAC came, a coalition of many parties and many key opposition figures in Kenya. And President Uhuru, Moi went home and quietly, and he's enjoying his retirement. He has been having problems with his health and all that due to old age. He's like over 95 or so years old. So, you know, but we were tired. And we said, you know what, you need to go take some rest. We need somebody else. And of course, at that time, the person he wanted to succeed him was now President Uhuru Kenyatta, which he lost miserably on those elections because he was running in the same party the former president had, that is KANU. So, you know, we got tired. And that was just 24. So Paul Biya has been there for 37 years or so. I mean... seriously, at some point, that's what I was saying, even the francophone part of Cameroon will get tired. Forget the anglophone who do not even want to do anything to do with the other side, the francophone. They just want to have their own country and, enjoy their own lives over there. The same thing Biafrans are looking for, And, Biafrans, when President Buhari was saying social media is fueling hate speech, I think he was targeting you guys because social media has been a great tool in mobilizing, even for protest and just mobilizing and creating awareness. So maybe to some extent, that is a message that he was sending to you guys, and now him calling for regulations on this. I mean, I don't know if that will affect your activities, as Biafrans, but of course Biafrans are across the globe, so that might not really affect them so much unless those who are still in Nigeria, that will affect them, of course, but that could be he's sending a message to you guys, as you are out there and are, creating these hashtags that are bringing awareness to the world on what is really happening in Biafra. If you are in Nigeria, his government might, just smoke you out and get you, is out there to get you. So, yes, and Joe Brown, thank you for writing in. You're saying Ambazonia is not sell. Any groups or persons that will attend the corrupt dialogue will be treated as a traitor. Fumban in 1961 will not repeat itself. Ambazonia can't stay together with French Cameroon. So I've seen that a majority of the people who have been giving the suggestions to the proposed talks, national dialogue by President Paul Biya, are perhaps the church or some opposition figures in the Francophone region. And of course, yesterday, some fighters from Ambazonia, but they say they'll only participate through a phone call. They have no intentions of going to Yaoundé. So that tells you they mistrust already. They don't trust Paul Biya or his intentions. And so, but the key figures in the Ambazonia have been left out of this dialogue. So I don't know how this will work out, and if at all this will be able to achieve the intended purpose, which has not been made very clear by Paul Biya's government. And so let's see if some of these suggestions and proposals that are being forwarded by the different groups and the stakeholders will actually be able to address the key problem, and that is, Ambazonians feel that they're in a country that they're not appreciated. Ambazonians feel they're in a country where they're treated as second-class citizens. Ambazonians are in a country where they feel that they cannot fit in and they're being forced to speak a language they don't even understand, and they feel they have been neglected for a very long time with the government, especially of Paul Biya, and they're saying enough is enough and we want to get out of Cameroon and form our own state of Ambazonia, and same as Biafrans, so let's just see if that will even solve anything. Amy Donsep, you're saying Muhammadu Buhari hate social media because it's the only way to expose him for all the pain he has caused to Biafra, all the killings, of course, and that is what I was saying. Any person, any head of state that is not doing right by his people, he will be not appreciate, the existence of social media because, one, this is a platform they cannot control at all. Perhaps they can ban all the sites in Nigeria, control just in Nigeria, but Biafrans are all over the place. Ambazonians are all over the place. Kenyans, not just in Kenya, but they're out there. So you can control what is happening in the country, perhaps to some extent, but those who are outside will continue talking. And I think that is what gives them very sleepless nights, because conversations will continue to happen, and it's out of their control. And the fact that it is out of their control, I think this is what is even making President Buhari be very jittery about the existence of social media. And now he's saying that social media is fueling hate speech. And I know you, Biafrans, this is a straight target to you guys. So I think whatever you do, especially when you're still in Nigeria, you might want to be a little careful, because you know what, I think he will be on you now. If I'm not wrong, So there we are. There in South Sudan, and of course, what else is happening now? Ethiopia, of course, the government has come out and confessed that about 1,200 people have been killed in inter-ethnic clashes that has been happening in the past 12 months. That's a huge number. I don't know why people are not talking about it. That has been happening. And of course, the Attorney General's office says violence has claimed the lives of at least 1,200 and displaced 1.2 million people have been displaced from Ethiopia. Why is this not making headlines? Why is this not important? Like, we are so desensitized from these things that are happening in Africa. 1.2 million people have been displaced in Ethiopia, and this has not even found its way to the African Union urgent meetings. You tell me. Or they just want to see when guns and bullets are flying, that's when they're like, okay, now let's convene this. Why this has not even been discussed in the African Union baffles me. Over 1,200 people have died in the past 12 months. How have things like this become normal to us as Africans, that we are so desensitized? We see villages being burnt in Ambazonia, and it's like business as usual. In the AU and in the leadership of Africa, we see the displacements happening and the brutality that is being meted in even South Africa through the xenophobia, or even in Biafra or Libya up there. or now in DRC Congo, we see a rising of other militia groups, and it's business as usual. We are so used to such scenes that we have become so desensitized. 1,200 people have died since the beginning of this year, and 1.2 million people have been displaced in Ethiopia, and this has not even made headlines. Something is seriously wrong, with us. I think we've become so complacent. I think even in this, that people are tired. It's just another figure. Okay, fine. So how many people have died? Until it will escalate to the point of what South Sudan is right now. Do you know how many people have died since the war started in 2013? Nearly 400,000. These are not just figures. These are human beings. So the level at which we have become very desensitized, and other leaders in Africa not being able to hold other leaders accountable, and AU, of course, miserably failing in its role as the body that is mandated to lead Africans. I think it's worrying for us, and as citizens of the different countries here in Africa, it shouldn't be like that. We cannot be desensitized when you hear that villages are being burnt somewhere, a hospital has been burnt somewhere, people have been killed. It has become so normal that nobody cares. Boko Haram has killed 30 people in Chad, or in a certain country, or even in Nigeria, abducted a certain number of schoolgirls. So after a while we were but when did this become normal to us? When did we become so accepting of things like this in this continent? I mean, something is seriously amiss, and I think we have a responsibility. If you are an African who means well for this continent, I think we have a responsibility of speaking out, and we have a responsibility of bringing awareness to some of these things that otherwise will never be addressed, especially by the people we are hoping that could address these matters. They all have their different interests in this, and so they'd rather just turn their eye and look the other side and not really talk about it. So when we are having a conversation with Dr. Matranga in the morning, and I brought it up that President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Somali President Farmajo, the person who was mediating these talks apparently was Al-Sisi, the President of Egypt, of course in his capacity as the AU chairperson, and you could see his reactions like, who? Al-Sisi, bring mediate over what? So, we already have skepticism with our leadership in the African Union. So when I'm just worried, I think, and MU saying Buhari is a fraud government. He deserves to die for killing of thousands of innocent Biafrans, attempts to kill our leader, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, of course, that forced him to flee over because there were serious threats over his life. And that's when he went to Israel. And he's been in Europe now for a while. And yes, there we are. So, all right. So anyway, the Egyptian security forces have arrested the former leader of the opposition political party, and a lot of things are happening there in Egypt. And now that Egyptian president is happy to mediate between Kenya and Somalia, I wish he could just take a flight back home very, very quickly, because things are continuing to get out of hand there in Egypt, and a lot of Egyptians are increasingly growing very uncomfortable with his leadership there in Egypt. So that is something that he should address before he's able even to come and mediate over anything and find a solution for any other African country. I think he has enough problems and enough in his plate as the Egyptian president, but still I think he has to act as if he's trying to in his capacity as the United Nations, African Union chairperson. And we have a minute or so left. Let's look at Libya very quickly. And of course, the United Nations has warned against escalating violence and a deepening humanitarian crisis in Libya, and is pushing the country closer towards a return to the full-scale war. I will not even talk about this today, because we know that the African Union leader, who is supposed to be mediating and finding solutions to the crisis in Libya, is an active participant in fueling that war that is happening in Libya, and that is AU chairperson Al-Sisi, because Egypt is supporting Haftar, who is fighting the UN recognized government. And so Egypt and Qatar, who support rival groups in the Libyan conflict exchanged barbs on Tuesday at the United Nations, highlighting just how difficult it will be for the United Nations to push a renewed peace efforts. And Libya's conflict has increasingly become a proxy war between foreign powers, which have been backing various armed groups since 2011 uprising against Muammar Gaddafi, and the former rebels have been fighting each other ever since. Now, Egypt, along with the United Arab Emirates, is supporting a Libyan Eastern Commander, that is Khalifa Haftar, and whose Libyan National Army, LNA, has been trying to take Tripoli from forces allied with the international recognized government. That is together. Now, Turkey and Qatar are backing the United Nations recognized government, and our Egypt, that is the chairing now AU, and the United Arab Emirates, they're backing the person fighting the UN recognized government. Like, it's exhausting even to just talk about it, because how are they even going to find a solution to that when the people who are supposed to be in the front lines in trying to find a solution to the crisis in Libya are the active participants and are the ones who are contributors to this crisis? It's just ridiculous and oxymoronic. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Earlier, we had a conversation with Dr. Matranga, who is in Brussels, and we talked about Somalia and Kenya and the handshake that the two countries had yesterday, and if at all that will have any effect, and which way moving forward in this case. And of course, the President Uhuru Kenyatta's United Nations speech, which I was not able to talk about so much today. Maybe we'll look at it later on in our other show. But for right now, I want to thank you so much for engaging with us and for your company, and of course for your very valued contribution to the show. You make this show a success. So I want to thank you so much. Let's meet here today at 8 p.m. East Africa time for another edition of The Punch. And then we can meet here again tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Africa. But for now, my name is Miriam Mugutu, and I love you for watching. Bye-bye.